So this is what our Pokedex app looks like. Um, Currently, it has a navigation controller, then our Pokemon list view controller, and our Pokemon view controller. So in the actual code, what we want to start with is declaring a variable Pokemon, which is where we store all the information that is given to us by the API when we load it, and another variable called current list, which I'll explain later on what it is needed for, and a variable defaults to store where the user defaults, which is where everything is stored inside the memory of your phone. We also declare a function called capitalize, which capitalizes a string by um, basically capitalizing the first character of the string and then adding the rest of the text without the first letter, which is what this text.drop first function does. Next, we initialize our search bar function. So, as you see in the main storyboard, we are using a search bar in our list view. So, for a search bar to work, we want to sort of filter our list of Pokemon, and That is what this variable current list does. So what we do is initialize current list as empty. If there is no search uh, in our in our search bar, we just um, say that current list is equal to all those of Pokemon, so that when we update our table, what the user looks at is the whole list of Pokemon, and then we just look at um, if for every Pokemon in our Pokemon list, we want to see if the search text is inside the Pokemon's name. So if I type SAU and the Pokemon's name contains an SAU, then this Pokemon will be appended to our current list. And so when we load our data, what is loaded is actually current list, and this is like updated every time the user changes the search text. Next is our review did load. What all of this does is just load the API. It has a lot of guards and do's just because we want to make sure that there are no errors and that our application doesn't crash when it loads. In this case, we want to set up current list as Pokemon when the app first loads because current list is what is always updated in our interface. And then we establish like some parameters for our table, which are number of sections, which is just one, the amount of rows, which is the amount that current list requires, which is current list.count, and what we want to look at is the capitalized name of each Pokemon in in the table. So that's what is portrayed. Let's run this. When you run the application, this is what it's loaded into the phone, which is our current list, which was set to Pokemon. And so when we come to the search bar and we want to type something like RT, what we actually get is every list of Pokemon which contains an RT. Next, we want the user, if when the user presses a name, to go into the Pokemon View controller, which gives us the information of each Pokemon. And so, how we do this is through a segue. So, in our Pokemon list controller, we have to prepare for a segue. We do just a temporary variable called catches. This is later. Uh, we will use this later on to establish which Pokemon the user has catched, and then we want to load this. But the main thing we want to show here is that the current list index, which for the selected row, uh, we get the URL from the Pokemon that the user selected and pass this onto destination.url. And notice the destination is our segue destination, which is our Pokemon view controller. So basically, destination.url is this variable here, which is in our Pokemon view controller. And here we establish all the outlets for the Pokemon view controller, which are all of the ones that are loaded here, which are an image view, title, number, types, the label for description, and a button for catching. So we establish all the texts as empty while it loads, and then we have our load Pokemon function. Um, we declare load Pokemon here. We want to open the URL that was passed on to us. And then we want to get all this information and basically insert them into our name labels, our number labels. Um, so to do our catching system, recall that we established here in Pokemon List via controller a variable named catches. So this is a dictionary from string to bool, and for each Pokemon, it is set as false for each name. So what this is, and then it's set into the false. So what this is a dictionary that is saved into memory, and it is set false for any Pokemon. So here, when our Pokemon is loading in Pokemon View Controller, uh, it it checks uh, if the Pokemon is catched and automatically sets our button to release because it means that it's catched. Because the button is initially set to catch. Then we set our types, and then we load our description. To load our description, we have another function, which is function load description, which is here. And it loads this API with our Pokename, and basically we go through all the structs. We want to check that the language is in English. And I also did this as personal preference, which was replace the new lines for just spaces because the API inserts new lines randomly, which are not good when you want to portray that. And then we also we want to load our sprites into our UI image, um, which is here established as PokeImage. So PokeImage.image is established as a UI image. And so all of this basically just allows you to click on a Pokemon, and then and then it loads for you this image, the title, the number, the types, and the description of the Pokemon. Sorry, this is kind of slow. And we can also press this button to catch the Pokemon. We can also like stop this build just so that you check that whenever we. And so when we load this once again, and we want to look at our Pokemon, we just look for it again, and you can see that its button is automatically set to release, which is the state at which the user left it. And so this is basically Pokedex. This is also just checking that our catching is false or true, so that whenever the user clicks the button, it's set to true or set to false. And so this is Pokedex.